Yeah, so you weren't a Christian. So what about Christianity sucked you in? Like, what tricked you?
Okay, so the thing that made me this definitely made me is when I had my first moment of, man, I really like this clean living. Clean living is for me. Because before I was living with my boyfriend, fornicating, just doing whatever I wanted to do in the sense of, just hanging out. And as time went on, I realized I'm having a good time.
Cowgirl, yeah. Reverse cowgirl, probably 69ing, I would guess. Reverse 69ing. Reverse 69.
Are you asking me if that's what I was doing?
Well, you're just saying like you were doing all this.
No, I said fornicating.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, that sounds great.
No, nothing past 69.
You wouldn't. Okay, this is.
Oh, it's going all right. What's up, Bear Bear? Energy drink freak. What's up?
Was like he never.
What up, Damien? What up, Brain?
Like he'll never do oral.
Gravity.
What is wrong with you?
Bomb B. Oh no, I don't know how you say it. Gravity bomb.
Your neighbor as yourself. Does that sound counterintuitive to you?
Energy drink freak. Send me a 6-pack of beer.
I did not like oral sex. I didn't like giving. I didn't like receiving.
Somebody's not doing that right.
You were doing atheism wrong. This is all wrong.
This is
so
wrong.
You have a bad comparison set because I don't know how you're doing Christianity. I'm sure you're doing it lovely. You're probably doing it not according to the
I did. All right, bet.
Because if you do it by the book.
I tried to sell my soul 9 years ago. Jay, you silly as shit.
Atheism by the book. There is no book. But if you do it like crappy, you're not going to enjoy it. So if you do atheism the fun way, it is wonderful. It is so freeing.
Okay, so
All right, man. We're going to read this book, dog. Fuck! I suck at this. What's up, rat? He said, what's a soul? You silly. It's not just how we get to heaven, but what we look like when we get there. A real problem for the soul is the very thing it is supposed to function for, carrying on after death. When we die, it is generally assumed by theists that the soul is the immortal entity that continues our existence into whatever realm we are deemed justified in inhabiting. If we go to heaven, however, if the soul looks like consciousness, then what part of your life is the soul supposed to represent? We've discussed this a little, but let's go further in looking at how the idea works in the context of heaven and hell. Imagine I am an 80-year-old person who has severe dementia and I go to heaven. Do I take that dementia with me, as that was me at death? I've lost most aspects of my former personality, the one that my family and friends know me by, at least. And my faculties have all but disappeared. Surely this is me for heaven, right? Wandering around, lost, barely remembering who I am and not remembering the people I miss, living in a sad confusion. Or do we get some kind of cherry picking of representation throughout my life? Is it me 5 years before death? 10 years before? 20 years before? If not, at what point? How is this decided? Is the soul a photocopy? And if so, when was that photocopy made? Or is it an amalgam, an average of properties that you have throughout life? In this way, the version of us in heaven is actually not a version of you that ever really existed, but an averaged out you, thus making the representation of you in heaven somewhat disconnected to who you were on earth. What about any number of shortcomings that I may have had with my personality? There may be things that are incongruous with a life in heaven. I may be a little quick to anger or somewhat jealous in certain situations, but not enough to invalidate my entrance to heaven. You can think of all sorts of scenarios like this. I'm a good person, but I like to occasionally take Class A drugs. Or I'm a decent person, but I have this or that vice. Do these personality traits and vices get eradicated so that I am being fundamentally changed for access through the pearly gates so that I am not at odds with the idea of heaven? What about if a baby or a fetus dies? Are they just sitting in heaven as a baby, unable to do anything but blissfully sit there smiling, but certainly not crying? What about a blastocyst? Are they sitting in heaven as clusters of cells without any kind of consciousness, ability to experience, or rationality? Or are souls a potential you, who you could become in some utopia? But there are just as many issues with this as any other supposed solutions, as we saw at the end of the last chapter, where we discussed which potential world God might choose to put us in. We can try to get around the problem, but not successfully. We return to our previous issues, such that if my soul is merely tenuously connected to my conscious self, and thus all my memories and sense of self, then it ends up being essentially unrelated to me, the entity being judged in the first place. It's like a balloon I'm holding, but that plays no active part in who I am and the decisions I make. It just floats alongside, tethered by a fragile thread. The other option is to bend the idea of heaven so much that it can somehow accommodate all of the many criticisms that can be leveled against it. We could do this, I suppose, because the revelatory guidance for heaven is so nebulous that people can make of it what they want. I'm not sure that even starting from philosophical scratch, you can make ideas of heaven and hell work, especially when confusing them with broken ideas like libertarian free will and souls. Free will, the problem of evil and heaven. I clearly can't get enough of free will arguments, or those concerning the afterlife. This is just a match made in heaven. Before we get on to talking about heaven, let's unpack earthly free will a little bit more. The free will theodicy is one of the get-out-of-jail-free cards used by many apologists to at least partly rebut the problem of evil. Why is there so much suffering in the world given an omni-God? The theodicy states that the corollary of giving humans the wonderful gift of free will is that they will, necessarily so, make bad decisions. They will choose badly, and this results in pain and suffering. And suffering is a necessary byproduct of the good of free will. But is this the case? Well, there are 2 points to make in reply to this claim. Number 1, heaven. If heaven exists, then there is no pain of suffering therein. And yet, it is also argued, on earth, humans must live with the suffering that comes as collateral from the usage of free will. In theory, free will is a really good thing. But if there is no free will in heaven, and heaven is supposed to be the place where humans exist in some kind of perfection, then free will can't be all that in a bag of chips. Like, for free will to be used as a consequentialist theodicy, the overriding benefit of free will outweighs the evil and suffering that comes with it. If free will is such a beneficial and great-making thing, then surely it must exist in heaven, or we merely become heavenly automata, precisely what theists argue against. Of course, we've seen it argued that God must have it too, right? But if God has free will, and it's perfect, it can only choose the most perfect, most loving thing. And so, as we have seen, God cannot have free will either. Essentially, heaven must exist with both free will and a lack of suffering and evil. If it can be done up there, then why not down here? Furthermore, as I pointed out in the next chapter, or as I'll point out in the next chapter, it is surely remiss of God not then to create only heaven. God should create only those whom it knows in advance, since it knows all the counterfactuals, will freely come to love him, and create earth as it is in heaven, to quote, a prayer about his will that is recited almost every Sunday in a Christian church near you. Which leads me to point number 2, logical necessity. The free will theodicy seems to suggest that free will logically necessitates evil decisions being made. But this does not appear to be the case. It is not logically necessary that humans will choose badly every single time, though it might be very probable indeed that they do. But you can envisage a group of people who could possibly choose benignly every single time. This is a conceptual or logical possibility. The flip side would be that choosing morally positively every time is a logical impossibility, not just an inductive probability. What kind of creation is that whereby God has designed us to fail or cause suffering no matter what? There seems to be a two-horned dilemma here for the believer. Either we are designed and created such that it is logically impossible for us to choose well every time, or God has chosen those of us when creating who would just happen to choose badly. Thus, God chooses to select people who will cause pain and suffering due to their own free will, and stopping it would perhaps go against its own free will. The main point is that there is nothing logically standing in the way of benign human behavior. God could create a set of humans who, given the existence of libertarian free will, which I contest, would just so happen to choose correctly every single time, thus eliminating, or rather minimizing evil and suffering that might come about from poorly freely willed choices. So there are two issues here. First, it is not necessary that free will causes pain and suffering, only probable. And thus, God does not have to create a world in which suffering does take place as a result of human free will. Secondly, this is either evidenced in heaven, free will does exist because it must do so unless we're to be robotic automata in heaven, and yet there's no suffering. Or free will does not exist in heaven, in which case we are just heavenly automata. The latter option renders heaven somewhat incoherent and is a good argument that it does not exist. Either way, you get problems on earth or problems in heaven as a result of how theists like to argue about free will. And here endeth the lesson. Chapter 25, why not just create heaven? Look at that. Let me go ash this cigarette, dog. Oh, fucking hell, my back. Daughter Judy. Oh, fucking hell. All right, motherfuckers. As if there weren't enough problems already, let's make life even more difficult for the proponent of Omni-God. This one is simple. Why not just create us in heaven? I mean, if the end game is eternal existence in the afterlife, then we can arguably advocate for skipping to the end straight away. This isn't like simply forward winding a film until you get to the end. In that scenario, people can complain that you're missing out on the joy of the film. In the movie of life, unlike a Hollywood movie, you get starvation, plagues, tsunamis, genocides, and countless other ways of suffering and dying horribly. Skipping to the end in this scenario sounds quite reasonable, or morally required, especially if you know the journey of suffering for all those unfortunate ones. Moreover, an omniscient God with full divine foreknowledge will also know each and every entity, soul, person, human, whatever, that will go to heaven or will go to hell. Indeed, it appears to create entities so that they go to heaven and so that they go to hell. This is morally dubious because God is creating entities in order that they all suffer on earth and in order that they suffer eternally in an afterlife. This is morally repugnant when the alternative is to simply create all the people God would know would freely come to love it in heaven. This would eliminate the material reality of earth with all of its suffering. God would also not create all the entities that it would know in advance would go to hell. This scenario evades several things. Number one, any suffering at all on earth. And number two, any interminable suffering at all for eternity in hell. And doesn't that sound morally better? Doesn't that sound compassionate? Doesn't that sound like the sort of loving, the kind of thing that an all loving God would do? This was brought up in debate by philosopher Ray Bradley and Christian apologist William Lane Craig some years ago. Bradley formulated the argument slightly differently as follows. Imagine that God knew in advance that 10% of people would freely come to love it in this world. So we'll call this world 1. 10% of all people created freely come to love God in world 1. So why doesn't God create only those people in world 1? Well, Craig claimed that in creating only those 10% in the alternative world, we'll call it world 2, this new scenario of fewer people interacting and living would change the dynamics and the scenario. Instead of the outcome of these people freely coming to love God as they did in world 1, in world 2, perhaps only 84% of this new set would now love God in this new scenario. So it is infeasible here that God could just create the original subset of people who would come to love it in world 1 on their own, because not all of them would now come to love God with this change in scenario and dynamics. Craig attempts to extricate himself from this bind by using the term unfeasible. He says, among other things, some people might be damned if created in some circumstances, but saved if they were created in other circumstances. So you can't just divide the line down the middle and put people on either half if it depends upon what world these possible persons are put into. Craig says perhaps there is no feasible world that God would create where everybody is saved by freely coming to love it. This looks rather like God is not omnipotent and or not omniscient, that it doesn't have the ability or know us to create such a world of freely loving individuals. Craig uses feasible as a term to wriggle out of the problem, as if God is somehow victim to the vagaries of different scenarios in this particular domain. But this is not logically impossible for God. In this debate, Craig was actually bettered by Bradley at this point, because he had no answer, and the audience was left with a bit of silence, a rare thing. But I don't think Bradley needed to talk about the creation of different worlds at all. God merely needed to imagine world 1, recognize who would come to freely love it, and then create those people, not in world 1, world 2, or world 3, but directly in heaven. Any other worldly creation is a knowing creation and consequent condemnation of hosts of people and animals. The only way to get God out of jail here is to posit some appeal to skeptical theism. We don't know the mind of God, and it moves in mysterious ways. One of these mysteries is that somehow there is a greater good that comes out of people and animals existing in material reality that trumps the entirety of suffering and death and pain across the whole universe throughout the sum totality of temporal existence. This is quite some appeal to quite an unknown, but it's all the theist has, and it, for me, falls well short of being persuasive. God should have known its chosen ones and created them in heaven. No hell, no pain, no suffering, no knowing condemnation to earthly or otherworldly suffering. Easy for God, right? Chapter 26. Satan is God's middle manager. God is supposed to be omniscient, omnipotent, all-powerful, almighty. The great-making characteristics of such a God are the paragon of abilities. It could achieve anything at the metaphorical click of its fingers. The fact that Satan still exists should tell you all you need to know about this problem. So, what the hell is Satan still doing hanging around? Well, of course, Satan doesn't exist either. But suppose you believe that both God and Satan are real. Well, then you'd be making no sense at all. Because in the UK, there's a flagship interfaith dialogue show called The Big Questions on the BBC. I remember some years back on it, they were discussing whether the devil was real, symbolic, or non-existent. A good proportion of the audience advanced different theories on Satan's ontological reality. This annoyed me. None of the speakers and thinkers, movers and shakers, were able to recognize the glaring issue with omni-God and Satan coexisting as if in some eternal battle of good versus evil. The philosophical reality is that omni-God could make Satan disappear, non-existent, at the click of his fingers. Any ontological argument for God or claim that it is perfect, such as under perfect being theology, argues for God's supreme omni-abilities. This has been discussed here at length. God is supposedly the greatest being in conception. Hence, there can be no rival being to God, since God could dispense with any rival on a whim. This means that if the devil exists, he does so on the behest of God. Either God actively wants him to exist, such that his disappearance would cause more grief than good, like some embodiment of the problem of evil, or God omits doing anything about his existence as some kind of passive will. The upshot is that it appears that Satan, if he exists, is doing a job for God. He is providing a service, if you will. Where God is the CEO, Satan is a management executive for God. Therefore, God must accept corporate responsibility for Satan. In other words, anything that is laid at the invisible feet of Satan in terms of blame and moral responsibility should actually be laid at the invisible feet of God. God allows or even plans by design or direct causation or an act of omission everything that Satan does. These two types of will, both active and omissive or permissive, are essentially the same, functionally and meaningfully. If God simply allows something to come to pass without doing anything about it, then God is actively being passive. But if God also has full divine foreknowledge and was to know about all future events, including his own actions, then it would have known before creation what Satan would do, and still actively chose to actualize this particular world. To explain the difference between omissive/permissive will and active will, let us return to the example of the 2004 tsunami. It can be seen in two ways. Number one, God actively wanted the tsunami to happen, killing 230,000 people for some reason, and purposefully caused it to take place. Omni-God brought it about, pretty much. Or number two, God omitted doing anything to stop it. Perhaps it was as a result of the way it designed plate tectonics. But when the tsunami came along, even though God was perfectly able to, the supreme being did nothing to prevent it. Remember, though, that God designed and created the world knowing that this would happen. Both options are functionally the same. God had the power to stop it, or to not cause it in the first place, but didn't. There must have been greater reasons for the tsunami to take place than for it not to. So we're still waiting on those reasons. This is, of course, made worse for God's culpability when it designed the world in such a way that it happened and God knew it would. Now, let us apply this kind of logic to Satan. The two options look like this. Number one, God actively wants Satan to exist and to do what Satan does, which is cause havoc and be evil. Thus, Satan is God's underling by active will doing his bidding like some evil henchman. Or two, God allows Satan to do what Satan wants. God has the power to stop Satan at any point, but chooses not to. Satan does what God wants by God omitting to do anything about Satan's actions. Indeed, Satan is not destroyed by God. According to certain fundamentalist, evangelical, and literalist believers, Satan still exists and still does evil. This either admits God's lack of power and not being able to control or destroy the devil, or admits that Satan is providing a service that God wants or needs. I see no way out of the dilemma here for the Satan-believing theist. Essentially, everything that the devil does is what God wants to happen. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen because God is omnipotent. Taking this one step further, if the theist believes in Satan doing satanic things, then this must be the case within the paradigm of omni-God. Satan plants fossils to fool evolutionists, or Satan causes the mass murderer to decide to murder, or Satan does this, or Satan does that. It is all part of God being omnibenevolent. Satan's existence provides a greater good, necessarily. There can be no gratuitous pain or suffering in God's creations. Otherwise, this would invalidate God's label of being all-loving. Therefore, Satan's existence is necessary for, or certainly still allows for, God to be labeled all-loving, which renders the whole scenario rather silly and nonsensical. Any amount of evil appears to be explicable, as we saw in the problem of evil section. But as a reminder, we could also take on here Stephen Meitzon's early argument about moral paralysis for the theist. It appears that the theist should do nothing to stop Satan doing his bidding, because this would stop the greater good that would necessarily come about from the satanic evil. 27. Infinite punishment for finite crimes. Crimes are finite. They last a finite amount of time, and their effects are not eternal. On the other hand, heaven and hell are eternal rewards and punishments for getting it right or wrong in our brief time here on earth. We don't need to get into the nitty-gritty of what influences human behavior, but humans are, at a minimum, heavily influenced or determined by the 9 elements I previously listed. Among the myriad causal variables that might be at play, they are, number 1, being born, 2, their genetic inheritance, 3, their life in the womb shaping their genetic self, 4, their time and place of birth, 5, their parents, relatives, race and gender, their nurture and experiences in infancy and childhood, 6, the mutations in their brain and body throughout life and other purely random events. 7, their natural physical stature, looks, smile and voice, intelligence, sexual drive and proclivities, personality and wit, and natural ability in sports, music, and dance. 8, their religious training, economic circumstances, cultural influences, political and civil rights, the prevailing customs of their times. And 9, the blizzard of experiences throughout life, not chosen by them, but which happen to them. All the molecules, particles, forces, and wave functions, i.e. the environment. We can so often understand atypical or problematic behavior, and if we don't, we certainly seek to. We, as police, psychologists, society, don't throw our hands up in the air and say, it was just free will, and then close the case file and send the miscreant away for eternity. But that's what happens when people are sent to heaven or hell. And remember that such people and destinations were themselves known and predicted, and therefore designed to be that way before creation. The only vaguely reasonable attempts to answer why an infinite punishment is appropriate for a finite crime are as follows. Number 1, the finite crime is a sin against an infinite being. Or number 2, you continue to sin in hell. The first answer sounds nice, but I'm not sure it really makes any sense to me. And it makes no more sense if reversed and applied to good deeds in heaven. Do finite good deeds really deserve infinite reward? A further problem in the internal nature of reward and punishment is that it fails to account for the differences in misdemeanors. Genocidal Hitler infinitely sins against God and receives eternal punishment, as does someone stealing a loaf of bread. In fact, since all humans are sinners in one way or another, all humans have infinitely sinned against God, from Mother Teresa to Adolf Hitler. It's yet another big, hot philosophical mess. The second answer, one that I've seen a few times, is merely an assertion someone makes about hell whilst knowing nothing about it. Sort of a desperate attempt to justify eternal punishment. But if you knew continuing to sin would keep you in hell in endless torment, why would you keep sinning? The reality is that many people have a very simplistic understanding of hell that fits in line with their intuitive and emotive psyche. This is nicely summarized in an online comment answering the question, is there a way to reconcile all of these issues with the unfairness of hell? The short answer is yes. Where I grew up, hell was a very real place, and I knew that many people would end up there. It was reconciled a few ways. The first way, they deserved it. If you take on an us versus them mindset and view other people as bad, you don't worry so much about them going to hell. The other way was everybody can make a choice. God reveals himself to all. Everyone who is going to hell is going there because of their choice, so it's their fault. Or the last way, don't talk about it. That became the most common way to reconcile it. As I explored and asked questions, I realized that all three of these ways to reconcile it were flawed once you gave them closer scrutiny. For me, the concept of hell was the first crack in the armor of my belief. I think it's the reason that in a lot of places, torment in hell has been replaced by absence of God. Now that the world is smaller, it's not unknown people in strange places that are going to hell. It's that nice Somali lady who checks you out at the grocery store. We all feel a little bit better if instead of being tortured by Satan, she's just merely gone. Damn, that's fucked up. Anywho. I have actually come across examples of pulling at the frayed thread of hell being the beginning of the eventual unraveling of the whole suit of theistic beliefs. I found this when collecting accounts of deconversion for a previous book, Beyond an Absence of Faith. Satan and hell are so deeply problematic that the merest of scrutiny leaves the ideas crumbling before you, and the whole religious worldview can follow close behind. Hell is not a nice idea, and the sooner the idea of hell is put to bed, the mentally healthier people will be. Indeed, research has shown that belief in hell is associated with lower happiness and life satisfaction at the national and individual level. It makes no sense. It offers no value in and of itself. It offers little value to society as an idea. So why the hell is hell still conceptually hanging around? The answer, I think, is that certain people can't get away from the intuitive pull of retribution. You're not like me. You've done some serious wrongs. You've rejected my belief system and therefore rejected me. So you're going to pay for it for a long time, buddy. I hope you like the temperature where you're going. Surely we can outgrow this sort of belief system by taking on broad understanding and compassion. After all, it might even be something Jesus would do. I'll just pause right there. If you were wondering, it was this book again, because I can't get enough of this book, 30 Arguments Against the Existence of God, by Jonathan M.S. Pierce, forwarded by Dan Barker. Okay. So there's that. Make sure you get a copy or whatever. I don't know. This coffee is cold. I need a new hot cup of coffee. And a blunt, son. I've been sitting here not smoking a joint or nothing. And y'all ain't said shit. Nah, you might have. I hadn't been reading the comments. Hell is just a condition of life. I agree. Too bad the block button on YouTube is at least subjectively true for now. Yeah. Bro, why you jacked? What's your workout routine? Mr. Burns, I appreciate the compliment. But honestly, you're not going to believe this, but it's a very simple routine. Okay. Every morning, Monday through Friday, I do 200 push-ups. Not all at once. You know what I'm saying? I'll get down and do 30, then 20, then 25, then 25. And that's 100. And then I'll stop and I'll clean the litter box, because my cats, So I'll go clean their litter boxes and then curl my beard, put my contacts in, and then I'll get down and do another fucking 100. You know what I mean? And I do all of this before I go to work. I have to be at work at 6:30 in the morning. So I'm done before 5:45. You know what I mean? Usually I'm done before that, but days like today, I kind of got started late. You know what I mean? Because I woke up a little later than normal. Instead of getting up at like 3:30 like I normally would, I got up at like 4 something, and then kind of lollygagged a little too long. But I still got all 200 done. That's all that mattered. So that's literally it, bro. 200 push-ups every morning, Monday through Friday. I don't do any on the weekend. I don't do anything on the weekend. Now, if I miss a day, Monday through Friday, then I'll try to make up for it on the weekend. But that's literally it, bro. I don't go running. I don't go to the gym. I don't even really watch what I eat. Like, I just do 200 push-ups Monday through Friday. That's it. That's the one takeaway that I learned from the Army. That just, you know, it's such a versatile exercise. You can do it almost anywhere. You know what I mean? And it's just very effective. Like, I mean, it works so many muscle groups. Works like your fucking shoulders. Works your fucking pecs. It works like this shit here. You know, it works your fucking back. It even works some of your stomach a little bit. Like, it's just an excellent exercise. Like, I just try to stick to that. You know what I'm saying? Like, if I don't do nothing else, I at least need to get these push-ups in. Or at least 100. Like, if you can't do 200, just do 100. Or if you can't do 100, just do 50. Just do something. You know what I'm saying? Like, do 50. Do like 10 5 times. Fuck it. You know. Do 12 5 times. That's even better. You'd be, you know, do 60. Actually, I recommend that. Do 12. Like, if you don't do push-ups and, like, that's just a hard exercise for you, then I would start out small, you know. Just do as many as you can, you know. And make sure you're doing them right. Like, don't do them wrong, you know what I mean? Like, just look up on YouTube, like, how to do a push-up the correct way, you know, because a lot of people don't do them right. But, yeah. So that's it. I'm not going to rant about that. My chest ain't even hairy, bro. Like, I shave the hair on my chest. I mean, there's some here, but it's like really thin. Like, it's like the hair on my cheek is thicker than the hair on my chest. Like, but that motherfucker just boop, 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 ooh, ooh, ooh. It look like a butt. Like, if you look, like if I was to turn this upside down, it look like a butt. It look like an ugly butt, but it'll still be a butt. Like, give me these cheeks. I'm stupid as fuck, bro. Well, thanks, energy drink freak. I appreciate that. Tara Lynn Dawkins up in this bitch. Tara Lynn Dawkins. Boy, don't nobody leave unhinged comments like you do. I swear, like, bro, if y'all have not seen my videos, go look at my videos and then go look in the comments and then go look for what Tara Lynn left as a comment on any video. You see Tara Lynn comment, you about to just be totally confused. Totally confused. You're gonna be like, I don't know what I'm reading. Like, I don't know what message was trying to be conveyed. I don't know what sentiment you're trying to express. I don't get the memo. Like, I'm just saying, like, but I love it though. You know what I'm saying? She be replying to her own comments. It's unhinged. I love it though. Fucking Tara Lynn, man. You're one of my favorites. Okay. I give you shit, but it's only because you're fucking nuts. But I fucking love you, dog. Y'all got to look at Tara Lynn's comments. I'm telling you. I had already made a video on one of her comments because I was just like, what? Oh, huh? But yeah, I love it, man. Most of my community, man, like when I be looking at like motherfuckers who be making like content off of my content, I just be like, bro, is this my community? Like, what am I looking at? You know, not all of y'all. I'm just saying, just the motherfuckers is like, yo, let me use Dade's content to make my own content. That content be all right sometimes. Anywho, Tara Dog, you can't even spell. She can't. I love that's what's up. It's okay. You don't know any better. Lol. None of us get it, but it's becoming kind of endearing. So yeah. What? Hey, y'all better leave Carla alone. Carla the shit. Carla J is the shit. Okay. Period. Bear is the shit too. I just thought I'd throw that out there. A lot of people are the shit. Stella Faircloth is the shit. You know what I'm saying? My dude Boogie Tron, he's the shit. You know what I'm saying? Blaine is the shit. Okay. I mean, there's a lot, man. Like, y'all the shit. Y'all the bee's knees. And this coffee is cold. I told y'all. Like, I need to warm this shit up, son. You look baked as fuck. Excuse me. Not yet. I need to go get baked as fuck. Let me go get the shits. Oh, fuck, bro. Oh, my goodness. See, this is why I left work early, bro. My back is fucked up, son. Ah. Oh, fuck me, dude. Shit. It's your fucking fault. Fucking fault.
One is why would God do that?
Daddy B.
Second one is does
you can't see me right there.
Just so that we love him. So which one do you want?
Petunia.
I guess the one that I
Louis. Wait.
Okay.
Louis.
So is
Petunia.
Ha! Just so that we can genuinely love God, or are there other perks too?
Joel.
There's a lot of perks to have free will.
Fuck.
I think a person needs to be able to decide how we want to live and not necessarily how we have to live. I think it's important that we have free will so we can...
Bitch, we don't have free will. What the fuck? We have will. Okay, it's just not free.
It's kind of like, you know, for me...
I'm about to get off here, y'all. My back is killing me. I need to take like some medicine or something.
Hire all these people.
But thanks for watching, y'all. I appreciate every one of y'all, son. Shut up, Donnie B. Look at him. Donnie B.
We realize that money.
Meow. Where you going?
So I would want to hire the person that would have integrity, even if I wasn't. And I think that's how I equate.
Boo boo. What's your thing, boo boo?
So this is what we get.
Boo boo. Let me. Okay, for real, I'm out of here, y'all. All right. Shut up, Daddy B. Wow, hell.